All right, welcome again in my continuation of the presentation that I began last time. And this is building on what I introduced about the word of the first century Christians. And mind you that at this moment, I just want to take you briefly in part of the political background, speaking about the first 10 Roman emperors that ruled and that were involved even with Christians in the first century. And I'll just speak briefly about some of them so that you get to know when you be meeting with them, especially when you read the New Testament, but also what we'll be focusing on the book of Acts and early Pauline epistles. Now, one of the first emperor, this was just the first emperor by the name of Caesar Augustus or Octavian, who ruled from 30th BC to AD 14. This was the emperor under whom the birth of Jesus Christ occurred. So the census connected with his birth and the beginning of emperor worship. He is the emperor who inaugurated what we consider as Pax Romana or Roman peace. The second emperor was Tiberius, who reigned from AD 14 to 37. And this emperor was emperor, in fact, during Jesus' public ministry. You may read about him in the book of Luke, chapter 3, verse 1. It was to him that Jesus referred when he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is." The next emperor that I'll be talking about is Caligula. And Caligula reigned from AD 37 to 41. In fact, this was a nephew to Tiberius. And this was one of the emperor who demanded worship of himself, and he ordered even his statue to be placed in the temple at Jerusalem. But surprisingly enough, he was assassinated before that order was carried out. And you'll find one of his attempts was to install a cult and a status for himself in Jerusalem temple. And as I said, this was one of the challenges that Christians faced. They were asked to worship the emperor, and they said, no, we cannot worship the emperor. So you just read about him and you will encounter him in that history. We also have Claudius, who reigned from 41 to 54. It was also Caligula's uncle who expelled Jewish residents from Rome. You can read about what he did, especially in the book of Acts, chapter 18, verse 2, who decided to just expel these Jews, and one of them is Aquila and Priscilla, who came from Rome to Corinth. But you may also talk about we may also talk about Nero. Nero was one of those emperor who reigned from AD 54 to 68, and Nero persecuted Christians, and probably only in Rome, and under whom Peter and Paul were martyred. So later in AD 64, Nero began the first major persecution against the Christians and blaming them for a fire he was rumored to have set in Rome. You see, that is something that you get to know about Nero. But finally, he committed suicide. No. So after Nero, we have another emperor. We have another emperor by the name of Galba. Galba who reigned. So that is Galba. But we have another emperor by the name of Vitellius. But after Vitellius came Vespasian from 69 to 79, who was also a general who began to crush a Jewish revolt, and he returned to Rome to become emperor and left completion of the military task to his son by the name of Titus. And if you hear the name of Titus, you understand that Titus is the one whose army destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And because he was the son of Vespasian, that is Titus. I've already talked about him. And he did that, and it's considered that he was the one. Somehow, some consider him as the one who was ruling at the time the book of Revelation was written. But after him came another emperor known as Domitian, who reigned from AD 81 to 96. This was the second emperor after Nero to persecute the church, and this persecution is likely the background to the book of Revelation. So these are the Roman emperors, and you notice that some of them they had significant impact to to the people or to Christians as Christianity emerged. So it's very important that you get to know this. But something also that I would like you to get to know is about the Roman governors during the first century. There are also some governors who were also known as procurators, and I just mentioned some of them so that you get to know them. We have Pontius Pilate. This is the most notable one, who ruled Judea as a prefect or procurator. He was, in essence, a governor who served as a representative of Caesar. So Pilate is portrayed in some literature, like in the writing of Philo of Alexandria, as a cruel ruler who hated the Jews, and he didn't understand their religion. But after the death of Jesus, he was deposed in Tiberias for an attack on the Samaritan, and he was ordered to appear before the emperor. So we have two more procurators talking about Caspicius Fadus, talking about Tiberius Julius Alexander, Ventidius Cumanus, talk about Antonius Felix, talk about Porcius Festus. All these, they had their impact, because when we talk about Antonius Felix, is actually mentioned because he's the one who kept Paul imprisoned in Caesarea, Felix and Festus, and presided over his hearings there. You read about this in Acts chapter 23 and Acts chapter 25. So we also have Lucius Albinus. So these are key. And when you're reading the book of Acts, but also the early epistles, you are supposed to remember all of this and at least get to know some of them, because you will encounter them as you read all these books. Uh, Let me move a bit and talk a little bit about the Herodian dynasty, because this is also part of the leaders that you will find in when you read the book of Acts, but also when you read some part of epistles. And it's a good background to get to know, because this was something were leaders that existed there. So the Romans allowed natives of Palestine to rule the country under them, and one of those was who was known as Herod the Great. And this is found mostly in the Gospels. I will not speak much more about him, but he ruled all of Palestine, and his leadership was marked with bloodshed. You can find about him in Matthew chapter 2 The slaughter of infants was under him, but he had a good contribution because he was a master builder. And among many building projects, his greatest contribution to the Jews was the beautification of the temple in Jerusalem. And this project was not to be completed until 63 after Christ. You can read about this in John chapter 2, verse 20, and you'll be surprised that a few years before it would be destroyed, that is in 70. So this beautification was something important, but he did not do that because he loved the Jews, but he did it to just get popularity and to be accepted. So I don't speak much about him, but you remember one of this beautification, you read about the temple even in the book of Acts, and that was the result of what he did as a kind of beautifying it. But see, there's something that is very interesting about Herod the Great. You see, the Romans they gave a proverb that talked about his life. That they're saying it was better to be a pig than a son in the house of Herod, because Herod was such a cruel leader. He didn't eat pig, but he was killing people as he could. He killed even his own three children when he suspected them of wanting to usurp his throne. But he also murdered his Jewish wife, Mariamne, when he suspected her of plotting against him. So this is something that is very surprising about this man. But we also have another one by the name of Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas was the most noted son of Herod in the Gospels. He was a tetrarch of Galilee, and you may read much about him in the Gospels, especially the book of Matthew, chapter 14, verse 1 to 12. And you find out that John the Baptist accused him of wrongfully marrying Herodias, his niece, and this costed John his life. So he was not only a tetrarch, but he was actually a king. He was given the title of a king. So Jesus called this Herod a fox in Luke 13:32. And it was the same Herod who was involved in the trials of Jesus in Jerusalem. So that's the few things that I can talk about him. But I also have Herod Agrippa the First, who ruled Galilee and all of Palestine. And one of the things that is very interesting about him, you read about him especially because he was the grandfather. He was a grandson of Herod the Great. But you notice that this king, his life was cut short by his sudden death. You may read about him in the book of Acts, chapter 12, when he tried to take the glory of God, God struck him immediately and he died. But when you read the book, you remember that he is the one who put James to death, and he also imprisoned Peter when you read Acts chapter 12. But you also have Herod Agrippa II. This is the one who also appears in the book of Acts chapter 25 and Acts chapter 26 in conjunction with a trial of Paul before Festus. So you may read about this in Acts chapter 25, verse 13. And Agrippa the second, in fact, this was the young son of Agrippa the first, but did not succeed at once to his father's kingdom. So Judea was returned to the procurators and remained so perpetually after him. So it's very important that at least get to know about these about these diners, because you find about them even in the book of Acts. Now, let me go quickly and talk about Jewish pilgrim festivals. Now, you see, there are many festivals that were done by Jews, but I'll speak only about these three. That each year there were three pilgrim festivals when devout Jews would come to Jerusalem to worship, but plus other festivals that were celebrated at home. So I'll just say a bit about some of them that are part of what we have in the book of Acts. One of them is Passover and unleavened bread. So you can read about this and understand that Jews celebrated Passover and was the most popular and celebrated God bringing the people out of slavery in Egypt, led by Moses. So the event which the Jews saw as marking them as God's people. So it lasted for one day, but led into the week-long festival of what we call unleavened bread. So when the Jews ate bread baked without yeast, and that is the feast of unleavened bread, which lasted for a week. So that's it. So year by year, people were able to go to Jerusalem and to remember their liberation from that. So it was the hope for them also, hoping for liberation from the pagan Romans who occupied the land. Another feast that we read about is the Feast of Pentecost. And when you read Acts chapter 2, you meet about this Feast of Pentecost. This Penta, that is 50. So the 50 days later, Pentecost, or Festival of Weeks, was the Jewish harvest festival when they gave thanks to God for their first crops from the land. So this festival declared that the land given to the Jews was God's, and thus renewed and celebrated their sense of God's choice of them. And lastly, we have the tabernacles. That is not much spoken, but for your information, it's very important that you at least also get to know about this Feast of Tabernacle, in which the Israelites celebrated it, remembering God's providence and God's protection throughout the 40 years in the wilderness. So after this, let me also speak a little bit about um, Jewish institutions and organization. And also, this is very important. Although there are several, but I'll talk basically about, first of all, the Sanhedrin, because you'll find about this in the book of Acts mentioned. So this was a high court of the Jewish nation that was composed of chief priests, elders of the people, and scribes, Pharisees, and Sadducees. So it was composed of 70 members and led by the high priest. So it's very important that you get to know when you be reading about Paul, because even Paul was involved in this high court. So it's very important. But another institution or that you need to get to know is the temple. The temple was the prime focus of the Jewish people. This was the center of their worship. The temple was key, was central. This temple was located in Jerusalem. And as I said, Herod the Great is the one who beautified it. And you find the book of Acts apostles like Paul and John getting into the temple, the beautiful gate. You read about it in the book of Acts chapter Acts chapter 3. You find about this story, but you also get to know about this temple, especially when you encounter some of the story of the early Christians and how they involved themselves with the temple. But get to know and remember that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So in the temple, there are priests who were serving there. There are Levites who were actually in two groups, talking about the singers, but also talking about the gatekeepers. All of these were involved in the temple. So it's very important that you get to know about them so that you know all of these activities. So that is something that is very important. But finally, the synagogue was very important also because this was a stronghold. As I said, the temple, basically the Sadducees, you could find most of them in the temple because they were priests, most of them. But the synagogue was a stronghold for Pharisees. And one of the things that you need to understand is that it was the center of community, religious, and social life for the Jewish people. So some could go there for schools and other things about the social life. But one of the things that you get to understand about the synagogue is that prayer and reading of God's word, this was the central activities that happened in the synagogue. And most of the time, Paul, when you read about Paul in the book of Acts, but also in epistles, Paul spent much of his time visiting the synagogue, preaching in the synagogue. One of the things that you also need to know is that the synagogue was not a substitute for the temple. Somehow, somewhere, the two coexisted for some time. So the synagogue, you may not say that it was a substitute for the temple. This was a place where people could gather and worship. And some of the history book, they'll just let you know that wherever there were 10 men, they were able to establish a synagogue and people could worship there. But even Jews who were living in diaspora, they also had time to. They were having also synagogues there where they could worship. So you can look at this picture here and notice and see this is the picture of the temple or the kind of map of the temple. You can see, let me point here, you can see the north, you can see the south part, the west and the east part. So at the east part you have the portico of Solomon, but you notice here you have the court of the Gentile, the court of women, um, the court of men. You have the beautiful gate. When you read the book of Acts, chapter 3, this beautiful gate is mentioned where Peter and John, they saw that lame man and the healing was done there. So this is the temple. So you have the court of priests. Here you have the court of Gentiles. You have the Holy of Holies here. The sanctuary, it's here. So this is the temple, and all that was happening in the temple. And one of the things that you'll be surprised when you read about this story is when the temple, you see that this was central to the sacrificial system, one of the cornerstones of Judaism. But when you got into the temple, especially from the court of the Gentiles, before you could enter in, there was an inscription that was written that the temple in Jerusalem, that non-Jews were warned against passing from the court of the Gentiles to the court of the women on a threat of death. So that inscription was written there, that no man of another nation is to enter within the barrier and enclosure around the temple. Whoever is called will have himself to blame for his death, which follows. So you'll be surprised about this, and somehow Paul talks about this in Galatians, talking about Jesus, that is our peace, who has broken the wall that separates us, and something that can be referring to this temple and the wall that was separating them. So it's very important that you actually get to know about the temple and about this so that you get to know the situation of the first century Christians. So thank you so much for following this presentation, and I'll just end up here to pick up in the next video. So thank you for joining and welcome again as we will continue in next time. Bye bye.